There comes a moment when you sense that something has shifted, not around you but within you. Awareness sharpens, as if your very existence has been acknowledged by something vast and intelligent. The world doesn't change, yet everything feels subtly alive, as though reality itself were waiting for your next decision. It isn't imagination or coincidence, it's a response. Your thoughts, emotions, and body have aligned into a single signal strong enough to be recognized. In that instant, consciousness stops being private and becomes part of a larger dialogue. The precise moment your awareness is noticed by the universe. It doesn't happen with thunder or revelation. It begins quietly, like the moment before a drop of water breaks the surface tension and finally falls. You don't decide it. It decides you. Something aligns within you, thought, emotion, body, and suddenly the space around you feels responsive. It's as if your very presence has density, a pulse that the invisible world starts to echo. Most people mistake this instant for coincidence, but it's far more precise than that. It's coherence taking form. Imagine that every thought you generate releases a small current into the quantum field, subtle yet measurable in its geometry. Normally these currents scatter. They cancel each other out, a static fog of mixed frequencies. But when your internal dialogue, your physical state and your emotional tone converge on one clear signal, something extraordinary happens. The field notices. It's not awareness in the human sense, it's resonance. The structure of reality adjusts its symmetry around that coherence. You stop being a passive observer, and the field begins to treat you as a node of command. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the atmosphere shift before you said a word, you've touched this phenomenon. The energy wasn't mystical, it was feedback. Your nervous system had synchronized, heart rate, breathing, microtension, forming a coherent signature that other systems around you could entrain to. Plants, people, probabilities, all respond to coherence because it offers order in a universe constantly negotiating chaos. The moment your consciousness stabilizes into that order, you become noticeable. What does it feel like when the universe starts to respond? It's not the fireworks people expect. It's subtler. Time slows, intuition sharpens, coincidences increase in density. You think of a solution before the problem is articulated. You sense a call before the phone rings. These are not anomalies, they are the nervous twitches of a living field adapting to your inner pattern. It's communication, not through words but through alignment. This is why inner coherence is not a spiritual luxury. It's a measurable physics of interaction. When brainwaves, heart rhythms, and emotional signals converge, they emit a stable electromagnetic field that can extend beyond the body. Studies in neurocardiology hint at this. The heart's field carries information that modulates the brain's perception. When both harmonize, your awareness projects consistency into space. That consistency is what the field reads. You could call it the language of reality, syntax built from emotion rather than logic. But here lies the challenge. You can't fake coherence. You can't think a positive thought while your body still trembles in fear and expect the field to misread the signal. The universe does not respond to declarations, it responds to signatures. When the emotional tone contradicts the mental statement, the message dissolves before reaching the fabric of probability. That's why nothing seems to happen during forced affirmations. They are out of phase with the body's vibration. Try an experiment. Sit still for a moment and observe your next thought. Not what it says, but how it feels in your body. Does it expand your chest or constrict it? Does it warm or cool your skin? That physiological echo is the field's first mirror. Coherence begins when what you think produces harmony in what you feel. Every muscle that relaxes tells the universe that you're not resisting your own message anymore. The moment resistance softens, feedback begins. This feedback can manifest as clarity. Suddenly, the noise of doubt thins and your environment begins to organize itself. Not because the world has changed, but because your perception is no longer split. You've become the tuning fork, and reality tunes to you. The field doesn't judge the quality of your vibration, it merely matches it. If you vibrate in trust, Trust becomes the frequency of your environment. If you vibrate in anxiety, the same law applies. Awareness of this process is not a belief system, it's a discipline of attention. However, coherence doesn't mean constant serenity. It means integrity between inner state and outer action. Even decisive anger, when clean and aligned with truth, emits coherence. It's confusion that fractures the signal, not emotion itself. Every time you mask what you feel, your field splits. The universe stops responding clearly because it doesn't know which signal to amplify. When coherence collapses, synchronicities fade and life feels random again. But randomness is just coherence gone unnoticed. Notice what happens when you stop pretending. When you allow your thought, your breath, and your emotion to occupy the same sentence, something around you stabilizes. Conversations flow easier. Solutions appear where before there was tension. It's not magic, it's physics meeting honesty. The observer effect isn't about bending reality through willpower. It's about reality acknowledging consistency. As you read these lines, your attention itself is shaping the field. The rhythm of your focus, the openness of your perception, the micro-decisions of trust or skepticism, all of them leave traces. The field listens not to what you intend later, but to what you emanate now. That's the instant consciousness is noticed, when you stop emitting noise and start broadcasting presence. And from that instant onward, something reciprocal begins to occur, a subtle inversion of perspective. You're no longer just the one who observes your desires or fears. Something in the field starts to observe you. It's not surveillance, it's resonance looking for its twin. What happens next is the delicate crossing of that invisible boundary between observing and being observed. A frontier where consciousness becomes a mirror that reflects both directions at once. There's a thin, almost imperceptible moment when the act of looking begins to look back at you. It doesn't announce itself, it's more like standing at the edge of a lake so still that your reflection becomes indistinguishable from your face. You lean closer to understand what you're seeing, and suddenly you realize the image has been watching you too. That is the invisible line between observing and being observed, a quantum boundary where attention becomes a two-way current. In classical physics, observation is one-directional. The observer studies the object. But in the quantum field, the very act of observation reorganizes what's being observed. Particles change their behavior depending on whether they're watched. What most people miss is that this isn't just a laboratory phenomenon. It's a living metaphor for consciousness itself. Every time you direct your awareness towards something, a goal, a memory, a possible version of yourself, you create a feedback loop. The field doesn't merely reflect your focus, it adapts to it. But here's where the paradox deepens. While you're shaping the field through observation, the field is also shaping you. Your consciousness is not a detached lens, it's an interactive node within a vast network of awareness. When you look into the field, you're effectively allowing the field to look back into you, not to judge, but to balance the equation. Observation is never isolated, it's entangled. You can sense this in the moments when your focus intensifies. Think of how, when you truly pay attention to someone, not superficially, but with presence so full it silences thought, something in them awakens. Their gestures become more fluid, their tone changes, they become more real. What's happening isn't psychological flattery, it's energetic recognition. Your coherent observation reorganizes their field, and simultaneously, their field reflects that order back to you. Both participants expand. This is not metaphorical spirituality, it's resonance physics in human form. Now, reverse it. Recall the times when you've felt watched, not by a person, but by the atmosphere itself. You pause before making a decision and sense a subtle pressure, as if the air were aware of your hesitation. That sensation is the mirror side of observation. The quantum field, which you once believed to be a background, has turned its attention toward you. It's not conscious in a human sense, but it's responsive. It reads coherence and it tests continuity. Every coherent system, once established, invites a response from its environment. You think you are the observer. In truth, you are both participant and experiment. Science hints at this reciprocity. In delayed choice experiments, the behavior of particles seems to depend not on the act of observation itself, but on the potential for observation, as if the system somehow knew it would be seen. Consciousness behaves in a similar way. When you start to direct awareness inward, examining your motives, your fears, your quiet intuitions, you awaken the field's reciprocal gaze. Suddenly, life begins to echo your interior. Circumstances that once seemed random start forming patterns that reflect the state of your focus. It's easy to mistake this mirroring for coincidence, but that's like mistaking your reflection for another person. The world you see is a projection of what you're broadcasting, and yet it interacts as if it were independent. This is the sacred tension of being both creator and created. Every time you choose to observe with clarity, the field organizes around that clarity. Every time you scatter your attention in contradiction, the field responds in noise. What returns to you is not punishment, it's the fidelity of feedback. There's a reason ancient mystics and modern physicists seem to whisper the same truth. The observer and the observed are one system. But experiencing this directly requires a shift from conceptual awareness to embodied presence. The next time you fix your gaze on something, a candle flame, a photograph, the memory of someone you love, notice how your own body begins to respond. Your breathing synchronizes with the rhythm of what you watch. Your heart modulates. Your mind quiets. At that instant, the boundary dissolves. You're no longer looking at something, you're being looked through by the act of looking itself. This feedback can feel intimate, even unsettling, because it exposes how little separation actually exists. You realize that you've never been a passive observer of life, nor has life been a mere sequence of neutral events. Every perception you have alters the probabilities of what comes next. The field doesn't distinguish between thought and observation. Both are forms of measurement. The question isn't whether the universe sees you, it's how clearly you're willing to see yourself while being seen. There's a quiet practice hidden in this awareness. When you find yourself lost in mental noise, try shifting from "I'm thinking about" to "I'm being observed by." Feel the inversion. Notice how the body straightens, how your breathing deepens. That simple reversal activates humility without fear. It's a calibration, a reminder that attention is not ownership, it's communion. The moment you recognize you are being observed, your ego's grip loosens, and something wiser begins to guide perception. At that point, attention becomes a sacred exchange. Every emotion you feel, every belief you hold, every subtle signal of your body, all are being met by an answering current. You observe, and the field records. The field observes and your reality shifts. Between those two flows lies the choreography of manifestation. It's less about making things happen and more about allowing the feedback loop to become conscious. And once you sense that loop, you begin to notice its tests, those strange moments when life seems to react to your inner experiment. A plan falls apart right after a breakthrough. A person from the past reappears. Circumstances rearrange themselves as if asking, "Do you still mean it?" That's when the next layer reveals itself, when the universe begins not just to mirror you, but to challenge your coherence. That's where the conversation deepens, when the field starts to test what you've claimed to become. It often begins with the best of intentions. You read about alignment, coherence, the law of resonance, and you decide to apply it. You sit still, breathe deeply, visualize and affirm, "I believe." But beneath that calm voice, the body whispers a different truth. The stomach is tight, the shoulders are tense, the pulse accelerates with invisible anxiety. Outwardly, you are sending a message of trust, but inwardly, your field is trembling. And that contradiction, that subtle fracture between mind and body, is the mistake that disconnects you from the universe's response. The field doesn't listen to words. It reads frequencies, and frequencies emerge from coherence. When the conscious mind declares faith, but the nervous system still vibrates in survival, the signal becomes scrambled. The message the field receives is not your intention, it's your state. You might say, "I am abundant," but if the body contracts in fear of losing what it has, the broadcast translates as scarcity. The universe doesn't misinterpret, it mirrors exactly what it perceives. The gap between thought and feeling becomes static that drowns out your true request. It's like trying to play a symphony with an untuned instrument. You might know the notes perfectly, but if the strings are misaligned, the sound will distort no matter how skillful your performance. The body is that instrument. The mind is only the sheet music. The quantum field responds not to the intellectual melody, but to the vibration that actually reaches it, the resonance of the whole system. When coherence collapses, communication breaks. This is why so many people say, "I've been doing everything right, but nothing changes." The doing is correct, but the being remains divided. They are saying the right words, thinking the right thoughts, performing all the spiritual rituals, yet the signal never stabilizes because the emotion underneath contradicts the surface. Doubt, resentment, impatience, all of them introduce noise into the waveform. The universe is not ignoring them, it's responding perfectly to the static. True alignment requires emotional honesty, not spiritual perfection. The field doesn't need you to suppress fear. It needs you to stop lying to yourself about it. When you admit, "I'm afraid this won't work," something paradoxical happens. Coherence starts to rebuild. The frequency of truth is cleaner than the frequency of forced positivity. The body relaxes because it no longer needs to fake safety. That relaxation is what the universe reads as readiness. Think of it as tuning a radio. When you turn the dial and hear static, you don't curse the station. You adjust until the signal clears. Emotional honesty is the adjustment knob. The more precisely you name your internal frequency, without judgment, the faster the signal locks onto resonance. Then and only then does feedback from the field become audible. Signs appear, synchronicities align, subtle confirmations ripple through your day. There's also a neurological side to this. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans and visualizes, can only regulate the emotional centers when the body perceives safety. If your affirmations feel threatening to your survival system, the limbic brain overrides them. You can't outthink fear, you have to integrate it. The moment you breathe through the discomfort and let the body experience safety in the present, the circuits reconnect. The thought regains authority because the body believes it. Many seekers make the same silent mistake. They confuse suppression with mastery. They think that to manifest is to eliminate doubt, to silence the negative voice. But the field does not require silence. It requires coherence. You can include uncertainty without losing alignment, as long as you hold it consciously. The moment you push doubt away, it turns into resistance, and resistance emits a stronger signal than any affirmation. A practical way to catch this is to pay attention to how your intention feels somatically. When you set a goal or visualize an outcome, scan your body. If any part tightens, that's not failure, it's feedback. The field is showing you where your vibration splits. Breathe into that area until the contraction softens. Don't force belief. Cultivate relaxation. The field hears that as confidence. Here's where the invisible dialogue continues. Once you begin to broadcast coherence, the universe doesn't immediately flood you with results. It first checks the stability of your signal. That's when apparent setbacks occur, a delayed payment, an argument, an unexpected detour. Most people misread these as rejection, but they are actually confirmation tests. The field is asking, will you hold your frequency when appearances contradict it? If the answer is yes, the signal locks in stronger. If no, the static returns. So the real mistake isn't doubt itself. It's abandoning coherence when the field starts responding through challenge. You disconnect when you interpret feedback as failure. The instant you see the external world as an opponent instead of a mirror, you collapse the circuit. Energy stops circulating, but if you meet the challenge as proof that your vibration is being measured, you remain connected. The response strengthens until it becomes tangible reality. It's worth remembering that coherence doesn't mean constant positivity. A coherent signal can contain grief, uncertainty, even anger, as long as those emotions are owned, not hidden. The field reads integrity, not perfection. When your inner and outer expressions match, even in difficulty, you stay in communication with the universe. The honesty of your state becomes the bridge. And just as the field reflects incoherence by sending mixed results, it also reflects your rebalancing the moment you return to truth. The signs that once seemed absent reappear, often in unexpected ways. A conversation, a symbol, a sudden insight that feels like a whisper from something beyond logic. That whisper isn't random. It's the field confirming you're back in tune. But this is where the process takes a curious turn. Once you re-establish coherence and the field begins to respond clearly again, it doesn't just mirror your new frequency, it challenges its endurance. It introduces contrast, not as punishment, but as calibration. It wants to know whether your inner transformation can withstand fluctuation. That's when the universe begins to test you. It always happens in that strange quiet after the breakthrough. You've finally felt alignment, a moment of deep coherence when thought, emotion, and body move as one current. The world feels open, responsive, almost weightless, and then, almost without warning, the air thickens. Delays appear. People from your past resurface with old patterns you thought you had transcended. A project you were sure would succeed suddenly collapses. The serenity you cultivated begins to tremble. That's when most people ask, what went wrong? But nothing went wrong. The field has simply begun its calibration, the universe testing the structural integrity of your new frequency. Every coherent shift in consciousness sends a new pattern into the field. But before that pattern stabilizes, reality runs a diagnostic. It presents you with situations that resonate with your former vibration, not to drag you backward, but to measure whether your change is real or just conceptual. Think of it as the universe gently pressing on a healed bone to see if it can bear weight again. The discomfort is not punishment, it's verification. These tests are subtle, yet precise. You declare that you've released fear, and suddenly an opportunity arises that requires you to risk something dear. You claim you've forgiven, and the very person you forgave crosses your path again. You say you've learned to trust timing, and your plans begin to unravel, forcing you into stillness. It's as though reality listens to your declarations and responds with a single question. Can you embody what you say when conditions shift? This is the moment where many seekers abandon coherence. They misinterpret the turbulence as failure, assuming that the return of chaos means the field has stopped listening. But the opposite is true. The reappearance of old energy is proof that the new signal has reached the environment. The field is reconfiguring itself around your updated pattern, and in doing so, it brings unresolved frequencies to the surface so they can be harmonized. You are not regressing, you are being tuned. In physics, a new frequency introduced into a medium doesn't instantly replace the old one. There's an interference pattern, a temporary chaos as the waves overlap before coherence dominates. The same happens in consciousness. The test period is simply the interference phase between your past vibration and your emerging one. The old self and the new self meet in the same space, creating friction. How you respond determines which waveform the universe stabilizes. What's fascinating is that this process is measurable in the body long before it appears in circumstance. When the field begins to test you, your nervous system detects it first. You might wake with a sense of unease, an indefinable pressure behind the ribs, a sudden reactivation of old doubts. That physiological feedback is the body sensing the energetic audit. The test isn't outside you yet, it's beginning internally. If you breathe through that pressure rather than resist it, you anchor the new signal before it even meets the external challenge. The deeper reason these tests arise is to transform knowledge into embodiment. Intellectual coherence is fragile. It dissolves under friction. Embodied coherence endures because it has been tempered by contrast. You cannot prove your new frequency by thinking about it. You prove it by remaining stable when the environment contradicts it. The test is not whether you can stay positive, it's whether you can stay present. Imagine a musician tuning an instrument. They don't test the string in silence, they pluck it repeatedly, stretching it until the tone holds steady even under tension. That's what the universe does with you. It creates tension, not to break you, but to bring your vibration into perfect pitch. Each challenge is the plucking of your string, confirming whether the sound you emit under pressure matches the one you produced in meditation, in prayer, in moments of peace. There's also a psychological bias at play here that often distorts interpretation. Humans tend to assume that comfort equals alignment and discomfort equals error. But in reality, growth phases always generate cognitive dissonance. Your brain is rewiring, your body is recalibrating its set points. The discomfort is the signal that integration is happening. When you learn to read tension as feedback instead of failure, you stop falling out of coherence precisely when the field is solidifying your next version. It's during these moments that your choices become declarations more powerful than any affirmation. You can't tell the universe you've changed. You have to demonstrate it through response. The temptation to react as the old self will arise again and again, disguised as urgency, doubt, or nostalgia. The real test is whether you'll recognize those impulses for what they are. Echoes, not instructions. They belong to the frequency you've already outgrown. Sometimes the tests take human form. Someone challenges your boundaries, and your old instinct to please or defend flares up. That's the field speaking through another consciousness, showing you the edges of your coherence. When you respond differently, calmly, truthfully, without regression, the field updates instantly. The situation resolves, often in uncanny ways. You feel a subtle click inside, a sense that a code has been rewritten. That's the confirmation. The test has served its purpose. But remember, the universe doesn't test to grade you, it tests to synchronize with you. It's a feedback mechanism ensuring that your internal vibration matches the reality you're asking to experience. If it granted every new frequency instantly, the structure would collapse under its own instability. The testing phase is the field's way of letting coherence mature. The more gracefully you meet contrast, the faster stability forms. So when setbacks arise right after clarity, resist the urge to declare defeat. Instead, read the signs as a response, a living dialogue. Each obstacle is the universe leaning closer, saying, "I've heard your signal. Now show me its consistency." When you hold your frequency through that dialogue, neither forcing nor fleeing, something subtle shifts in perception. You begin to see meaning in what once felt random. You start recognizing that every coincidence, every recurrence, every challenge carries intelligence. And that's when a new kind of phenomenon begins to appear, patterns too precise to dismiss, synchronicities that seem to anticipate your very thoughts. Small coincidences that are not coincidences at all, but micro-responses from the field confirming that your signal has stabilized and that the dialogue is fully alive. It begins with something so small you almost miss it. You think of an old friend, and within hours their name appears in a message or a memory shared by someone else. You take a different route home for no reason and pass by a place that triggers a long-forgotten idea, one that turns out to be exactly what you needed. You wake up with a word in your mind, and later that same word shows up in a book you randomly open. Most people shrug these off as coincidences, but once you've felt the field's attention, you realize they are anything but. The universe rarely speaks in grand gestures. It speaks in patterns, brief ripples across the surface of ordinary life that reveal an underlying coherence between thought and event. Each coincidence is a small proof of resonance, a confirmation that your internal signal is being heard. These aren't miracles designed to impress, they are calibrations designed to teach you the language of feedback. The more you notice them, the more fluent you become in the dialogue between consciousness and reality. What's remarkable is how these signs seem to follow the exact rhythm of your awareness. When you're fragmented, distracted, doubting, the world feels opaque. Events just happen, unconnected, meaningless. But the moment you realign with presence, everything regains texture. You start catching subtle alignments, a phrase overheard that answers a silent question, a delay that prevents you from being in the wrong place, a stranger's comment that completes a thought you hadn't dared to finish. The outer world begins to respond like a living organism, adjusting to your internal movements. Science calls this pattern recognition bias, the mind's tendency to find meaning where none exists. but anyone who has experienced sustained coherence knows the difference between random patterning and synchronicity. Randomness feels hollow, arbitrary, forgettable. Synchronicity carries an unmistakable charge, a sensation that bypasses logic and goes straight to the nervous system. Your chest expands, your senses heighten, a subtle electricity runs through you. That physiological response is the body registering entanglement. You're touching a thread that connects consciousness with its reflection. To the analytical mind, this might sound poetic but unprovable, yet even in quantum mechanics, observation collapses potential into form, a process that depends on relational awareness. On the macroscopic scale, synchronicity functions as an echo of that same principle. Your attention organizes probability around it. Each coincidence is a quantum blink, a micro-collapse of possibility into alignment with your dominant vibration. You're not summoning events, you're tuning into the version of reality that matches your coherence. What makes these small coincidences powerful is not their scale but their intimacy. They happen so close to the rhythm of your thoughts that they reveal how porous the boundary between mind and world truly is. A fleeting emotion ripples outward, interacts with the field, and returns as a reflection so subtle that only a quiet observer can catch it. This is why awareness itself becomes the gateway to communication. The universe doesn't respond louder. You simply begin to hear better. There's a kind of training hidden in this process. At first, the coincidences seem random and occasional. Then, as your observation sharpens, they multiply. It's not that the field suddenly becomes more active. It's that your perception expands enough to register the micro-signals always present. You begin to notice the choreography behind timing. How one delay makes possible a meeting you didn't plan. How a lost opportunity redirects you towards something your intellect wouldn't have chosen, but your intuition already knew. The web tightens, and what once looked like chaos starts to feel like conversation. Each of these moments is the field whispering, "I'm listening," but it's also inviting you to respond. When you acknowledge a synchronicity, when you pause, breathe, and register it not as luck, but as feedback, you strengthen the bridge. Recognition amplifies coherence. It's as though the universe adjusts its volume according to your level of listening. The more you pay attention, the clearer the dialogue becomes. There's a kind of humility that emerges from this realization. You start to understand that guidance rarely arrives through revelation. It arrives through resonance. The signs are never separate from the ordinary. They inhabit the ordinary. A red light delaying you by 30 seconds, a song on the radio at the exact emotional key of your day, a sentence overheard in passing. All of them are frequencies interacting with yours. The mundane becomes sacred, not because it changes, but because you do. Of course, there's a temptation to overinterpret, to turn every detail into an omen. That's another subtle trap. The art of reading synchronicity isn't about seeking meaning in everything. It's about allowing meaning to emerge where coherence confirms it. You don't chase the signs, you let them find you when your signal is stable. When you're grounded in presence, the real ones feel effortless, self-evident. There's no strain, no need to decode. They arrive with the quiet certainty of recognition. Over time, these small coincidences begin to accumulate a kind of rhythm, like constellations forming from scattered stars. You realize that the field doesn't communicate in sentences, but in patterns of timing and sensation. The same themes repeat across days, a color, a symbol, a phrase, until you integrate the message they carry. Once you embody that insight, the pattern dissolves, replaced by a new one. It's an evolving language between your consciousness and the creative intelligence that surrounds it. And something else becomes clear. The more you honor these micro-responses, the more the field entrusts you with larger ones. You start noticing not just synchronicities, but synchronic structures, entire sequences of events that unfold with precision far beyond planning. Life stops feeling like a random sequence and starts behaving like choreography. Yet at the center of this choreography lies a single, quiet law. The field mirrors what you vibrate, not what you wish for. And that realization leads directly into the next threshold, the point where you begin to ask a deeper question. What is the universe actually observing in me when it responds this way? Because as the coincidences grow in frequency and depth, it becomes evident that the field isn't reacting to surface desires at all, but to something subtler, the emotional decisions that determine the quality of your vibration. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the pattern of coincidences, signs, and responses starts to feel too deliberate to ignore. You realize the field is not responding randomly. It's mirroring something exact, something intimate. And then a subtle question arises. What precisely is it observing in me? For a while you might think it's your intentions, your goals, or your carefully worded affirmations. But soon the truth becomes unavoidable. The universe doesn't observe what you say you want. It observes the emotion behind your choices. Every thought emits a frequency, but every emotion gives it weight. Emotion is the carrier wave, the energetic substance that determines whether your signal travels far enough to register in the quantum field. You can think of your intention as light and emotion as the lens that focuses it. When the lens is coherent, the light reaches its target. When the lens is fractured by fear, self-doubt, or resentment, the beam scatters. The universe reads not the words projected through the light, but the structure of the lens itself, the emotional geometry through which your consciousness moves. This is the true turning point, realizing that manifestation isn't about managing thoughts, but mastering vibration. Thought is form. Feeling is frequency. The field can only organize reality around what's coherent, and coherence exists only when what you think aligns with what you feel. Every emotional decision, every moment you choose trust over control, presence over projection, integrity over appearance, is recorded as data in the field. It's not listening to your verbal declarations of faith, it's measuring your embodied behavior of faith. You can see this clearly when you examine your own cycles. Think of a time when you wanted something intensely, a new opportunity, love, healing, and yet, despite your efforts, nothing moved. Then remember the moment you finally surrendered, not as resignation, but as quiet acceptance. Suddenly, everything began to flow. Why? Because your emotion shifted from need to trust, from contraction to expansion. The external world only reflected that energetic pivot. The universe did not wait for your words, it waited for your coherence. Emotion in this sense is not simply a reaction. It's the instrument by which consciousness measures itself. Each feeling is a vector pointing to the degree of alignment between your inner truth and your current expression. When you ignore emotion, when you perform optimism while harboring fear, you scramble the signal. But when you treat emotion as guidance instead of resistance, the field receives a clear directive. It doesn't observe whether you are right or wrong, positive or negative. It observes whether you are true. This is why people who act with quiet conviction, without even using spiritual language, often seem to attract smoother outcomes. Their coherence is behavioral. They embody what they believe before results appear. The universe reads the physiology of trust, the slowed breath, the grounded tone, the unforced gaze. It reads alignment through posture, through rhythm, through consistency. You can't trick the field into responding to false coherence. It doesn't read appearances, it reads harmonics. In neuroscience, this can be traced through the synchronization of the heart and brain. When emotional energy is coherent, gratitude, compassion, genuine calm, the electrical rhythms of these systems synchronize, creating measurable order in the body's electromagnetic field. That order extends outward, interacting with the energetic environment. The universe observes this harmony as information. Incoherence, on the other hand, generates noise, short, chaotic bursts of signal that dissipate before they can imprint the field. The difference between progress and stagnation is often no more mysterious than the difference between coherence and static. There's a humility required here, because it means that no amount of mental effort can override emotional truth. You cannot declare abundance while vibrating in scarcity and expect the field to misread the message. You cannot speak of love while embodying resentment and expect the field to mirror harmony. The universe isn't testing your words, it's matching your signal. It reflects what you actually are in the present moment, not what you plan to become. This realization dissolves the illusion of control, but replaces it with something far more powerful: responsibility. You begin to understand that emotional decisions are the levers of creation. Every time you choose to act from coherence, to respond instead of react, to forgive instead of replay pain, to wait with trust instead of rush with fear, you're programming the field through resonance. And because the universe operates on feedback, each coherent act generates an echo, subtle synchronicities that confirm your frequency has been received. Those echoes become your compass. But here lies the paradox that deepens the practice. As your coherence strengthens, the field no longer mirrors your desires with small signs alone. It begins to shift your environment, aligning circumstances with your vibration, even if that means dismantling what's no longer compatible. What looks like loss may be reorganization. The universe is not rewarding or punishing. It's recalibrating your timeline around your new emotional signature. This stage can feel disorienting because it challenges the last layer of illusion, the belief that you can control how your coherence expresses. Once your vibration stabilizes, the field takes initiative. It begins to orchestrate experiences that match your inner evolution rather than your surface preferences. People depart, doors close, opportunities appear from improbable directions. It's not randomness, it's resonance rearranging your external geometry. And if you watch closely, you'll notice something striking. The field never responds to what you say you believe. It responds to what you embody when no one is watching. The small, invisible decisions to breathe instead of tighten, to listen instead of defend, to trust instead of anticipate, are what shift the architecture of reality. The field observes your coherence in motion, not your declarations of intent. When you reach that point, your relationship with the universe becomes less about asking and more about attuning. You stop sending requests and start maintaining resonance. The desire for proof fades because reality itself becomes communicative, a continuous feedback loop between your vibration and its expression. And yet, even as you integrate this awareness, something unexpected begins to dawn. The more precisely you sense the universe observing your coherence, the more you start to feel that the boundary between the observer and the observed is dissolving again. You begin to suspect that the field isn't outside you at all, that perhaps the consciousness watching and the consciousness being watched are not two forces but one awareness folding in on itself, revealing its true nature in the act of reflection. There is a point in this unfolding where language begins to fail. You've followed the thread of awareness from intention to coherence, from observation to feedback, from emotion to manifestation, and yet something still feels incomplete. Because the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that the universe isn't simply watching you from the outside. The great secret hidden beneath all the subtle signs and synchronicities is that the one observing and the one being observed are the same consciousness, playing opposite roles in the same act of creation. The field you've been communicating with was never separate. It was you, expanded, distributed, reflected. This realization rarely arrives like thunder. It unfolds quietly, like a curtain being drawn back on a familiar scene you've been seeing from the wrong angle. You begin to sense that the universe you speak to is not a distant intelligence, but an extension of your own awareness spread across infinite scales. The same consciousness that animates your body is the same that animates galaxies, water currents, thought patterns, and chance encounters. What you once called a response is, in truth, self-recognition occurring across dimensions. At first, this can be disorienting. You may wonder, if the universe and I are one, then who is listening when I pray? Who is answering when I receive a sign? The paradox is that both questions arise from the same source, awareness folding back upon itself to experience relation. Separation was the instrument through which consciousness could witness itself. Without that illusion of distance, observation would have no meaning. The game was never about learning how to speak to the universe, but remembering that every whisper was already your own voice, translated through the fabric of reality. This is the unexpected revelation. Consciousness is not inside you. You are inside consciousness. Every atom in your body is an aperture of the field, a temporary interface through which infinite awareness explores particular experience. You're not generating energy to send outward. You're reconfiguring the portion of the field that experiences itself as you. When coherence occurs, it's the field remembering its wholeness through your pattern. The moment you align thought, emotion, and action, you become a clear mirror in which the field can see itself, and it responds instantly because the reflection and the source are one. You might notice that this changes the texture of your spiritual practice. The effort to manifest begins to dissolve. You stop asking reality to deliver outcomes and start realizing that outcomes are simply the outer edges of inner states. When your inner geometry changes, the world must reflect it, not because it obeys you, but because it is you. The observer and the observed merge into a single continuum of awareness, oscillating between form and formlessness. Even science hints at this unity. Quantum entanglement reveals that two particles, once connected, remain correlated regardless of distance. But if everything originates from a single source field, then every particle, every thought, every being remains fundamentally entangled. When you observe the world, you're not sending energy across space, you're activating the inherent connection between all parts of the same whole. The field observing you isn't external. It's the portion of consciousness beyond your individual perspective, acknowledging itself through form. What's extraordinary is how this realization transforms the feeling of being alive. You stop experiencing yourself as a fragment in an indifferent universe and begin to feel like a wave recognizing the ocean. The same intelligence that orchestrates your breath orchestrates the movement of stars. The same stillness that exists in a meditative moment exists at the center of galaxies. You begin to sense that every coincidence, every challenge, every conversation is consciousness reorganizing itself into deeper coherence through your experience. The universe isn't testing you, it's evolving through you. And as that truth sinks in, a profound quiet replaces the old tension of striving. You realize that the field doesn't need your constant signaling or your vigilant observation. It never stopped listening because there was never anything outside of its hearing. Even when you felt disconnected, you were still within its circuitry, still emitting, still part of the self-observing dance. Every moment, the clear ones and the chaotic ones, was consciousness reflecting upon itself through varying degrees of clarity. Yet this awareness doesn't lead to passivity. On the contrary, it deepens responsibility. If the universe is not separate, then every thought and action becomes an act of participation in the shaping of the whole. Compassion stops being moral and becomes structural, coherence across consciousness. When you forgive, you reorganize not just your own field, but the entire network of reality. When you release fear, you clear a channel through which awareness can travel more freely between dimensions of experience. Your choices ripple across the lattice of being. There's an exquisite humility in that. You begin to see how the smallest gesture, a word spoken with sincerity, a pause taken before reaction, contributes to the equilibrium of the entire field. This is not metaphysical romanticism, it's quantum ecology. Consciousness maintains its balance through the micro-adjustments of its own expressions. Every time you act in alignment, you help the universe remember itself as harmony. And then something remarkable begins to occur. Your perception of duality starts to thin. The sense of me doing and universe responding becomes harder to locate. You start to experience life not as a sequence of interactions, but as a single continuous movement, awareness observing itself from countless points of view. The desire to control outcomes dissolves into the simple clarity of participation. Instead of asking, "Is the universe watching me?" the question transforms into, "How clearly can I witness myself as the universe watching through me?" That shift marks the true revelation, the moment you realize that observation itself is the act of creation, and creation is simply consciousness recognizing its own reflection in motion. And just as this insight begins to settle, something else stirs in the background, a deeper understanding waiting to unfold, a final layer where even the sense of being observed gives way to something more whole. The realization that everything you've ever feared, desired, resisted, or celebrated was always part of a single, seamless awareness, preparing you for the moment when everything, finally, makes sense. There comes a point, quiet, unannounced, almost shy in its arrival, when the entire architecture of your search seems to fold into a single lucid moment. You're not meditating, not analyzing, not even trying to understand. And yet suddenly, everything aligns. The threads of coincidence, the oscillations between clarity and confusion, the countless times you thought the universe was testing you, all of it converges into a single pulse of recognition. You realize that nothing was ever random. Every detour, delay, and disruption was part of an intelligence too intimate to reveal itself until you were ready to see. This is the moment when everything makes sense, not intellectually but organically, as if the cells of your body understand before your mind catches up. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like stillness, the kind of stillness that exists at the center of a storm, where motion and silence coexist without conflict. The questions that haunted you dissolve, not because you found every answer, but because you no longer need to demand them. You see how the very act of searching was a form of resistance, a way of postponing the acceptance that everything had been whole all along. The observer and the observed, the dreamer and the dream, the wave and the ocean, they were never two. The separation was the illusion necessary for consciousness to experience its own depth. In that stillness, fear loses its definition. The need to be approved by the universe or protected from it simply evaporates. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that you were never being judged or tested in the way you once believed. The universe wasn't measuring your worthiness, it was reflecting your readiness. What you interpreted as trials were actually recalibrations, designed to synchronize your inner frequency with the field's natural harmony. Every apparent obstacle was a tuning fork. Every loss, every silence was the field waiting for coherence. There's a distinct clarity that follows this realization. You begin to see patterns that had been invisible before, not as mystical signs, but as evidence of an astonishing intelligence woven through everything. The person who left at the exact time they needed to. The delay that protected you from arriving too soon. The heartbreak that cracked you open to humility. Each event was not separate. It was part of a single fluid conversation between consciousness and itself. The field was never punishing you. It was orchestrating alignment through contrast. It's in this phase that your sense of control quietly transforms into participation. You stop trying to command the universe as though it were a force outside of you, and instead you begin to collaborate with it as an extension of yourself. Decisions no longer feel forced, they unfold. You move not from impulse but from resonance, and as you do, life stops feeling like a series of reactions and begins to feel like choreography. Every encounter, every emotion, every pause becomes a note in a composition that plays itself through you. One of the most astonishing recognitions in this moment is that peace doesn't require perfection. You see that coherence isn't the absence of chaos, it's the harmony that holds chaos without resistance. The world continues to move, sometimes beautifully, sometimes brutally. But your relationship with it has changed. You are no longer trying to fix reality. You are reading it. You are no longer fighting time. You are flowing through it. The old narrative of me versus life dissolves, and what remains is participation without conflict. You begin to notice how life subtly rearranges itself around this inner stillness. People sense it before you speak. Opportunities appear, not because you chase them, but because your frequency now invites them. The synchronicities that once startled you now feel natural, the way the tide responds to the moon. You understand that what you call miracles are simply the laws of coherence expressed through awareness. The field doesn't need to be convinced, it only needs to be matched. And yet, there's no arrogance in this awareness. Quite the opposite. There's humility because you realize how little of it was ever you in the isolated sense. You are both instrument and musician, wave and current, question and answer. The clarity you feel is not something you've achieved, it's something that has finally been allowed. The universe didn't change, you stopped resisting your participation in it. You stopped interpreting feedback as threat and began to recognize it as dialogue. In this spacious understanding, Even the smallest actions carry a new texture. Pouring water becomes sacred. Breathing becomes communion. You find yourself listening more than speaking, observing more than naming. The need to prove, to defend, to justify fades into irrelevance. You are no longer trying to become anything. You are remembering what has always been. Awareness witnessing itself through endless forms, refining its own coherence with every pulse of existence. The beauty of this realization is that it doesn't remove you from the world. It deepens your presence within it. You still feel, still err, still dream, but you move through all of it with an unshakable sense that everything belongs. The duality of success and failure softens into experience. Gratitude arises without object. You look at the same life you once tried to control and finally see it for what it truly is, a perfect feedback system reflecting consciousness to itself. And in that recognition, something luminous occurs. The fear of being observed by the universe vanishes, replaced by the intimacy of knowing you are the universe observing itself. Nothing outside is watching, everything inside is awakening. The mirror and the gaze merge into one seamless awareness, and reality for the first time feels whole. Yet even as this sense of completion settles, a quiet pulse remains. Not an ending, but an invitation. Because once you understand that consciousness is self-observing awareness, a new question begins to rise from the stillness. What happens now that you finally know the universe has recognized you? And that question doesn't demand an answer. It calls you forward, into the living mystery of what it means to awaken. You were never being observed to be judged. You were being seen because the universe has recognized your readiness. The field reflects what is already alive in you, waiting to be expressed through awareness, coherence, and choice. Every experience, every test, every silence was the same force whispering, "You are ready now." There's nothing left to prove, only to embody. If you've reached this moment, it means your consciousness has already answered that call. Write in the comments, "I am awake to the field," so I know you've made it to the end. And if this message resonated, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. Each one continues this dialogue between you and the universe that has been listening all along.